September 17, 1944. 2:43 p.m. Somewhere in the Bocage country of Normandy, 23-year-old Private First Class Eugene Gene Hartley from Willow Creek, Iowa, stood in a muddy field facing 87 German prisoners who had just done something no American officer had ever seen. They'd refused repatriation. They wanted to stay with him. The battalion commander stared at the written petition, signed in neat German script by every single POW. "Private Hartley, what in God's name did you do to these men?" Before we continue with Gene Hartley's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Normandy, September 1944, where Gene Hartley was about to explain how a farm boy's simple philosophy had transformed the most dangerous job in the European theater. Gene Hartley wasn't supposed to be guarding prisoners. He was a rifleman with the 2nd Infantry Division, the kind of soldier who kept his head down and followed orders. But on August 12, 1944, 3 weeks after the breakout from Normandy, a German artillery shell had torn through his squad's position near Saint-Lô. Shrapnel had ripped into his left shoulder and collarbone, leaving him unable to handle the recoil of an M1 Garand. The battalion surgeon patched him up and gave him 2 choices: go home with a medical discharge or take a rear echelon assignment until he healed. Gene chose the latter. He'd made a promise to his best friend, and he intended to keep it. The assignment was POW guard duty at a temporary holding facility 15 miles behind the front lines. It was considered the easiest job in the army. Show up, watch the fence, make sure nobody escaped. The prisoners did their own cooking, organized their own work details, and generally caused no trouble. Previous guards had treated it like a vacation, sleeping through shifts, playing cards, letting the senior German NCOs run everything. When Gene arrived on August 19th, the camp held 42 German prisoners, a mix of Wehrmacht infantry, a few Luftwaffe ground crew, and 3 17-year-old boys from a Volkssturm unit who looked like they'd never seen combat. The previous guard, a corporal from Pennsylvania, gave Gene a 30-second briefing. "Don't let them out. Don't let them kill each other. The food truck comes Tuesdays and Fridays. Good luck." Gene spent his first day observing. The camp was a former French farm, 2 stone barns, a collapsed house, and 5 acres of fenced pasture. The prisoners slept in the barns on straw pallets. They received 2 meals a day, breakfast at 0700, dinner at 1800. Both meals came from the same source, 50-gallon drums of a grey substance the Supply Corps called stew, but which tasted like boiled cardboard mixed with motor oil. Gene watched the prisoners eat. They consumed the food mechanically, without enjoyment, faces blank. Nobody talked during meals. Nobody made eye contact. They looked like men who'd given up on everything except surviving until tomorrow. That night, Gene couldn't sleep. The stone wall of the barn where he'd set up his cot was cold against his back, and his shoulder throbbed with a deep grinding ache that the morphine barely touched. He thought about the prisoners' faces during dinner, that hollow, defeated look. He'd seen the same expression back home during the worst years of the Depression, when farmers lost everything and had nothing left but the clothes on their backs. His father had managed to keep the family farm through those years, but barely. Gene remembered the summer of 1934, when rainfall had been so scarce that the cornstalks grew no higher than a man's knee. Other families had been eating dandelion greens and boiling potato peels for soup. The Hartleys had shared what little they had, a dozen eggs here, a sack of flour there. His father never made a show of it. He'd just leave things on doorsteps before dawn, and nobody ever mentioned it. "You don't help folks to get thanked," his father had told him. "You help because it's what you'd want done for you." Gene thought about that philosophy as he stared at the ceiling. These men were the enemy. They'd killed Americans, maybe even guys from his own division, but they were also cold, hungry, and defeated. The war for them was over. They weren't a threat anymore. They were just men waiting for whatever came next. The next morning, Jean did something that violated every regulation in the prisoner of war handbook. He went into town, a small village called Saint-Jean-de-Dailly, and used 2 weeks' pay to buy supplies. He came back with 20 pounds of potatoes, a crate of turnips, 6 loaves of bread, a sack of onions, and a small jar of salt. At 1800 hours, when the food truck arrived with the usual drums of grey stew, Jean signed for them as required. Then he hauled his purchased supplies into the kitchen barn and started cooking. The senior German NCO, an Oberfeldwebel named Klaus Zimmermann from Hamburg, watched with narrow-eyed suspicion as Jean peeled potatoes. "What are you doing?" "Making dinner," Jean said. His German was terrible, a few phrases picked up from a grandmother who'd emigrated from Bavaria, but he could make himself understood. "The food they send tastes like pig slop. Figured we could do better." "We," Zimmermann said carefully. "I'm eating it too," Jean said. "Can't expect you fellows to eat anything I wouldn't put in my own mouth." Zimmermann stared at him for a long moment, then called over 2 other prisoners. Within 30 minutes, they'd transformed the supplies into a massive pot of potato soup with onions, turnips, and chunks of bread floating on top. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food. Hot, seasoned with salt, and prepared by human hands instead of dumped from a factory drum. When Jean rang the dinner bell at 1830, the prisoners lined up expecting the usual routine. Instead, they found steaming bowls of soup that smelled like actual cooking. Nobody moved. They stood there, bowls in hand, staring at the contents like it might be a trick. "Go ahead," Jean said. "It's food. Eat." The first man to taste it was one of the teenage Volkssturm boys, a kid named Peter Kowalski from a village outside Danzig. He took a cautious sip, and his eyes went wide. Then he started eating fast, like he was afraid someone would take it away. The others followed. Within seconds, the entire camp was eating real food for the first time in months. Some of them had tears running down their faces. After dinner, Zimmermann approached Jean's station at the gate. "Why did you do this?" Jean shrugged. "You were hungry." "I had some money. Seemed like the right thing to do. You know we are your enemies. War's over for you," Jean said. "You're just prisoners now. No point in starving you." Zimmermann studied him for a long moment. "Most guards do not think this way." "Most guards aren't farmers," Jean replied. What Jean didn't know was that his simple act of cooking a decent meal had just violated 3 separate regulations regarding fraternization with enemy prisoners. What he also didn't know was that Oberfeldwebel Klaus Zimmermann had been an elementary school teacher before the war, a man who'd spent 6 years trying to keep children alive through Allied bombing raids, Nazi fanaticism, and the grinding machinery of the Eastern Front. Zimmermann recognized something in Jean that he hadn't seen in any other American: basic human decency without ulterior motive. The next morning, Zimmermann made Jean an offer. "My men and I would like to help with the camp maintenance. The fences need repair, the roofs leak. If you provide materials, we will do the work." Jean thought about it. The camp was indeed falling apart. Barbed wire sagging, roof tiles missing, drainage ditches clogged with mud. "I'm not supposed to give you tools. Regulations say you might use them as weapons." "Private Hartley," Zimmermann said formally, "I give you my word as a German soldier that no man under my command will attempt escape or violence if you allow us to work. We will return all tools each evening." Jean made a decision that should have gotten him court-martialed. "All right, but if anyone tries anything stupid, it's my neck on the line." "Understood." Over the next 2 weeks, the camp transformed. The prisoners repaired fences, patched roofs, dug proper latrines, and built a functional kitchen area with a stone oven. Jean continued buying food supplies with his own money, and the prisoners began cooking communal meals, German recipes mixed with American ingredients, creating strange but edible combinations. More importantly, the prisoners started acting like human beings again. They told jokes. They sang songs in the evening. The teenage boys started teaching Jean some German in exchange for English lessons. Zimmermann organized a small library using books salvaged from abandoned French houses, and prisoners began reading to each other during evening hours. Jean's battalion commander, Major Robert Thornton from Philadelphia, visited the camp on September 3rd for a routine inspection. He expected to find the usual setup: Bored guard, sullen prisoners, minimal interaction. Instead, he found prisoners working cooperatively on construction projects, Jean eating dinner with them at a communal table, and what appeared to be a volleyball game happening in the exercise yard using a ball made from rolled-up socks. Thornton pulled Jean aside. "Private, what exactly is going on here?" "Just keeping them busy, sir. Idle hands and all that." "You're eating with them?" "Yes, sir. Same food they get. I cook it so I know it's safe." Thornton looked around the camp at the repaired buildings, the organized work details, the prisoners who made eye contact and responded to instructions without hostility. By every measurable metric, this was the most efficiently run POW facility in the entire sector. Prisoner escape attempts, 0. Disciplinary incidents, 0. Suicide attempts, 0. In other camps, those numbers averaged 15%, 8%, and 3% respectively. "Carry on, Private," Thornton said finally. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." What Jean was doing was simple. He treated the prisoners like his father had treated struggling neighbors during the Depression. He shared meals. He listened when they talked. He didn't pretend to be their friend, but he didn't treat them like animals either. When a prisoner got sick, Jean made sure the medic came. When the 17-year-old boy from Danzig cried at night from nightmares, Jean didn't mock him. And when Zimmerman asked if the prisoners could write letters home, something officially prohibited, Jean quietly arranged for the letters to be sent through Red Cross channels. But Jean's approach faced a severe test on September 9th, when the camp population suddenly doubled. A Wehrmacht unit had surrendered near Brest, 83 men from a coastal defense regiment. They arrived in 5 trucks, exhausted, shell-shocked and expecting the worst. The previous camp they'd been held at had treated them like cargo, packed into wire pens, fed once a day, beaten if they complained. Several had infected wounds. 2 were running fevers that suggested sepsis. Jean took one look at them and made an immediate decision. He sent Zimmerman to organize the existing prisoners into work crews. Within 2 hours, they'd cleared space in the second barn, set up additional sleeping areas, and started cooking triple batches of food. Jean used his entire month's pay to buy medical supplies from the village pharmacy, and he personally cleaned and bandaged infected wounds while the battalion medic was off duty. The newcomers couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of them, a former baker named Ernst Müller from Cologne, kept asking if this was a trick. "When does the beating start?" "No beatings here," Jean said. "You follow the rules, you'll be fine." "What are the rules?" "Don't try to escape. Don't fight each other. Help with camp work when asked, that's it." Müller stared at him. "That's it?" "That's it." Over the next week, Jean watched as the new prisoners slowly realized they weren't going to be mistreated. They began integrating with the original group. Zimmerman organized them into work details. The former baker started improving the bread recipe. A carpenter from Bavaria began teaching woodworking skills to the younger prisoners. The camp began to resemble less a prison and more a strange, temporary community. Jean's shoulder was healing, but he'd been cleared for return to combat duty by September 15th. His replacement, a sergeant from Texas named Bill Crawford, was scheduled to arrive on September 18th. Jean prepared to hand over the camp, writing detailed notes about each prisoner's medical needs, work assignments and behavioral patterns. But something happened that nobody, including Jean, had anticipated. On September 16th, Oberfeldwebel Zimmermann requested a formal meeting. Jean agreed, and that evening, all 87 prisoners gathered in the exercise yard. Zimmermann stepped forward, holding a document written in careful English on pages torn from a French schoolbook. "Private Hartley," Zimmermann began, "we have written a petition. All 87 of us have signed it. We request that when the war ends, we be allowed to remain under your supervision rather than be returned to Germany." Jean stared at him. "That's not how it works. You'll go home when the war's over." "Some of us have no homes," Zimmermann said quietly. "Hamburg has been bombed to ash. Cologne is rubble. Danzig will likely become Polish territory. We have heard what is happening in Germany. The starvation, the occupation, the trials. Here we have food, we have work. We have been treated with dignity. We wish to remain." "I'm a soldier," Jean said. I won't be running this camp forever. I'm going back to Iowa when the war ends." "Then we wish to come to Iowa," Zimmerman said. The other prisoners nodded. Some of them were crying. Gene felt something break open in his chest, a strange mix of pride and grief. These men who'd fought against everything America stood for were asking to give up their homeland to stay with a 23-year-old farm boy who'd done nothing except treat them like human beings. "I can't make that decision," Gene said finally. "That's way above my rank." "But you will deliver the petition." "Yeah, I'll deliver it." The next morning, Major Thornton received the petition along with Gene's verbal report. Thornton read it twice, then called his superior officer. Within 6 hours, Gene was standing in front of a full colonel, explaining how he'd accidentally created a situation where German prisoners wanted to remain in American custody indefinitely. The colonel listened to the whole story, then said, "Private Hartley, do you understand that you violated approximately 17 different regulations regarding prisoner treatment?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that you spent your own money to feed enemy combatants?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that you've created a diplomatic situation that's going to require intervention from the Red Cross, the State Department, and probably the Supreme Commander himself?" "No, sir. I didn't know that part." The colonel stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Private, you're either the dumbest soldier in this man's army or the smartest. I haven't figured out which yet. The petition is denied. These men will be repatriated according to the Geneva Conventions. But your methods are being documented for future prisoner-of-war protocols. Dismissed." Gene returned to the camp on September 17th and delivered the news. The prisoners took it quietly with dignity. Zimmerman shook Gene's hand. "Thank you, Private Hartley, for reminding us that the war has not destroyed all decency." Gene was reassigned to his rifle company on September 19th. He fought through the Siegfried Line, crossed the Rhine, and ended the war in Czechoslovakia. He never saw any of the 87 prisoners again. After the war, Gene returned to Willow Creek, Iowa. He married a girl named Dorothy Swenson from the next farm over, and they raised 4 children. He worked the family farm for 43 years, growing corn and soybeans, never talking much about the war. In 1983, Gene received a letter forwarded through the Veterans Administration. It was from Ernst Müller, the former baker from Cologne. Müller had survived the war, returned to Germany, and rebuilt his bakery in the ruins of his city. He'd spent 38 years trying to track down the American private who'd treated him like a human being instead of an animal. "I think of you often," Müller wrote. "You showed me that even in war, kindness is possible. I teach my grandchildren about you. I tell them that not all Americans were conquerors, some were simply good men." The letter included a photograph. Müller standing outside his bakery, holding a sign that read Hartley's Bread in English. Gene kept the letter in his desk drawer. He never framed it, never showed it off. When his children asked about it, he'd just shrug. "Helped some fellows out during the war, that's all." More letters came over the years. Peter Kowalski, the teenager from Danzig, had become a schoolteacher in West Germany. He sent Christmas cards every year, always signed, "Your grateful student." Klaus Zimmermann had returned to teaching in Hamburg. He'd written a memoir that included an entire chapter about the Iowa farmer who taught me that the enemy could be honorable. Gene never responded to the letters, not out of coldness, but because he genuinely didn't understand what was so special about what he'd done. He'd fed hungry men. He'd treated them with basic decency. That's what any decent person would do. Gene Hartley died on March 8, 1992, at the age of 71, from complications related to the shrapnel wound he'd received at Saint-Lô. His obituary in the Willow Creek Chronicle mentioned his military service in one sentence. Eugene served with the 2nd Infantry Division in Europe during World War II. There was no mention of the 87 German prisoners who'd wanted to stay with him forever. No mention of the violation of 17 military regulations in service of simple human kindness. No mention of the letters from grateful former enemies that filled an entire drawer in his desk. But at Gene's funeral, something unexpected happened. 3 elderly German men showed up, men who'd traveled from Germany to Iowa to pay their respects to a soldier they'd never forgotten. They stood at the back of the church during the service, and afterward, They explained to Jean's bewildered family who they were and why they'd come. "Your father saved our lives," one of them said. "Not from battle, from despair. He reminded us we were still human beings. We never forgot that." The family donated Jean's letters to the Iowa Veterans Museum, where they remain in the archives. Researchers studying POW treatment during World War II occasionally cite them as examples of how individual actions could transcend official policy. There is no statue of Jean Hartley, no memorial plaque, no military decoration beyond the Purple Heart he received for his wound at St. Lo. But in a small cemetery in Willow Creek, Iowa, his gravestone has fresh flowers on it year-round, some placed by family, some by local veterans, and some, mysteriously, with German writing on the cards. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. These stories of quiet heroism deserve to be remembered, and your engagement keeps them alive. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever witnessed a simple act of kindness that changed everything? We want to hear your stories. Jean Hartley never sought recognition for what he did. He didn't think he deserved any. But 87 men remembered him for the rest of their lives, and that perhaps is the only recognition that truly mattered. Thank you for keeping these forgotten heroes alive.